And I love Clint. And A Fistful of Dollars. Remember when he shot all those guys and they said, "Why do you help us?" He says, "Because somebody happened to a friend of mine and there was nobody to help." So Clint Eastwood was one of my favorite therapists. This one with Gordy, the kid says, "I wish the hell I was your dad. You wouldn't be going around talking about these stupid shop courses. It's like God gave you something, man. All these stories you can make up." And he said, "This is what we got for you, kid. Try not to lose it." Kids lose everything unless there's someone there to look out for them. And if your parents are too effed up to do it, then maybe I should. But isn't that true, though? Unless there's somebody there to look out for them. That's what we want to do, isn't it? Now, this sometimes is a therapist I want to be. Hello, Clarice. This is Captain Paul Hammer, and he came up with a suggestion. For example, he said, one that said, "The only man that can go to war and come back is the same man as a sociopath." He was really great, but the workshop I attended with him, some really goofy dude got up in the middle of the lecture and just stood up there, and just stood up there and stood up there. And finally, Hammer says, "What is it I can do for you?" He said he was really upset about that Geico commercial where F. Lee Ermey was a therapist and heaved a box of tissues at a client. And he says, "I'm really upset about that." And Hammer goes, "Can I do something about that?" He said, "To be honest with you, I've wanted to throw a box of tissues at a client occasionally." But he was great. He took his stuff from Sophocles as well, and also C.S. Lewis on story. When you tell your story and it doesn't make you cry, that's when you know you've healed. One of the things he suggested, and I suggest to you, if you can follow HIPAA, is when something really hurts you in your practice, tell somebody you love. Tell your wife, your significant other, whomever, but tell somebody, because I was sitting with a couple, and it was intense because the husband was a killing machine. He was Marine Special Forces, and he was well trained for what he did, and he wasn't good for much else. And I was trying to work with them because they had been friends for 10 years and they got married for 15. I was trying like hell to help them, give them tools to save their marriage. Turned out she didn't want him. She wanted me just to tell you he's done. You know, I saw her a year later in a public setting. She looked like she wanted to kill me. But the guy says, "I'm told that I'm only supposed to tell a chaplain and my buddies about what happens." I said, "But here you are. She has no idea what's going on for you. So how are you going to be close to her?" And it went on, it didn't work, but he didn't tell her. Now, this is very poignant for first offenders, but when we've got people in our offices, these ghosts or whatever they are there too. This is my son-in-law, Josh, on the left, and I'm so proud of him. He had buried actually there were two fire department suicides in about a month, and also he had lost two of his good friends, and he figured out, I don't want to do this anymore. And there were family members that gave him a lot of crap. He had 15 years in, 5 more years he's got retirement. It's not worth it. And I really respected him for that. In fact, when he and David, my son-in-law, and my son in the middle deployed, we discovered that Josh was in more imminent danger as a fireman than those two guys were. And Anita Rodriguez, an artist I did a presentation with, painted that for me. Now, here's something bizarre. The Donner Highway. Any of you traveled it? Don't. I traveled it. I had an empty gas tank. I was scared. I was hungry. And it was midnight. And there was no call boxes or anything. And I realized I'm going to fall asleep in my car with some hungry spook looking in at me. But at any rate, finally the phone rang. And it was my son. And he was very upset. He had been in his first firefight in Afghanistan. And it was very flattering to me because I was never in the service, so I didn't know what help I could be to him. But he called me and talked to me about it. And he said, "Dad, it's ridiculous." He says, "I'm fighting for my country, but I'm here on a mountaintop in the Hindu Kush Mountains." He said, and what Eric had done, and it's like Reagan did, he forgot to duck. He just had Dishka, a 50 caliber machine gun, go over his head, and it disturbed him. But so I decided, this is where creativity madness came in. I sent him a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, which is, if you don't, it took place on a battlefield where Arjuna didn't want to fight. And Krishna was his charioteer because Arjuna saw his friends and brothers and teachers on the other side, and he didn't want any part of the war. So Eric, I told Eric, I gave that to Eric, and Eric said, that really helped me because I had nothing against the Taliban. He said, I saw the stuff they did. It was hideous, but I couldn't understand why they were trying to end me when they never met me. He said, got really strange. But then I realized my job is not to end them. My job is to keep my guys alive. His OP had been overrun, and they didn't leave any prisoners. So this was Eric, and this is a David Gilkey photo. This is Eric in the middle of a firefight. I forgot to bring up the bullet, but it was a 50 caliber thing going off all around him. And this was not the thing you really want to see. One time we were on the phone, he goes, damn it. I go, what's the matter? So he says, can I call you back? I'm taking incoming, But he was so good and so conscious about what he did. He was interviewed by NPR. He was interviewed by MSNBC. He was on Christmas Eve on NBC. And when he left, there was a sizable price on his head by the Taliban. So he did a good job. But this is how I coped. Is it time? Okay. I coped by going into the Patriot Guard and escorting some of these guys to their final resting place. But let me take you, what healed me was I was taken to a curandera here in New Mexico, and I had been cursed with a violent temper all of my life, and she took it out. And it finally came out with all the cancer, but she did that out for me. And when I went to the hospital, I had had some really bad abdominal problems. My wife couldn't get me to go to the hospital, but she appeared to me. I was sleeping on a couch, and I see a 6-foot version of death. And that worked for my wife. I didn't pay attention. But I saw this, and this is what got my practice going back together. Is Mary Breckenridge, and I read that she was actually, I looked at Jack's book, she was an incarnation of Ananka, the goddess of necessity. She was a very rich woman who, like Majo, she became a matriarch. She married a guy, her family was very wealthy. Her grandfather was vice president of the United States. She married a guy, he died of appendicitis the following year, and she went to nursing school, came back and married another guy, had 2 children, and when they died, she divorced him, and she she went to Europe to help with the public health after World War I, came back and founded an agency to provide medical care to Appalachia, 770 square miles. And she did that. It was established in 1925, and she was quite a midwife. And yet she had had such tragedy, but her goal was to safeguard the lives of mothers and babies, and gave nursing care to the sick of both ages. And that's actually, the McCoys are part of it. Her religious, she was thought to be a spiritualist, but she just went to New York and met with a spiritualist to see her kids once a year. But she was actually a disciple of a woman who was the disciple of Julian of Norwich, who was the first woman who ever wrote theology in English. And this is, to close, this is the woman that really got it to me. She did I forgot to tell you, when I saw that coffee cup with a horse on it, I realized it said, I heard in my mind's ear, do what you do, because that's who you are. And I didn't understand it. This woman delivered 3,000 babies in Auschwitz. And these are some of the babies. She had faced off with Mengele. He demanded the babies be executed. She saved 500 of them. And when I used to think Mary Breckenridge was going to be made into a saint, she's actually in that process right now. But they gave me the process of Sofer Sune, which is the deepest form of self-control. And again, the way to find your myth is what happened to me, is to find your zeal, to find your support, to know what stage of life you're in. The problems of youth are not the problems of age. Don't try to live your life too soon. By listening too much to gurus, you try to jump over the whole darn thing and back off and become wise before you experience. The way to find your own myth is determine those symbols that speak to you and use them, might say, as basis for meditation. The thing for me is my myths found me. So I feel a little bit that here's your myth.
Hey, Mr. Grumpy Gills. When life gets you down, you know what you gotta do?
I don't want to know what you gotta do.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim.
Dory, no singing.
Oh,
Dory.
I love to swim. And
Dory.
when you want to swim, you want
See,
to
I'm gonna
keep
get stuck now with that song. Now it's in my head.
Sorry.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you.